Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the very first live stream hosted by NASW-Texas Voter Advocacy Committee. We're so glad that you're joining us today. So whether you're watching live or catching the replay, we thank you for taking the time to be a part of this very important conversation. Today, we're introducing our committee, sharing why it was created, discussing something that impacts every social worker, regardless if you practice, where you practice, whether it's micro, macro, meso. We're talking about civic engagement. And so many people think advocacy belongs only to the macro social workers or the policy professionals. But today we're going to challenge that idea and explore how public policy affects every aspect of our profession, from private practice to hospitals to schools, child welfare, community agencies, and beyond that. So before I begin, I want to introduce everyone or allow them to introduce themselves. I'll go first. My name is Dr. Tiana Charles. I am a licensed clinical social worker in Texas, but also 6 other states. And I'm in private practice. I work full-time places. Um, and I have a lot of different hats. And so I practice in pretty much all of the areas. And so one thing that I believe why advocacy matters to me is because I practice in multiple different areas, I see how policy impacts how we work, but also how the people that we serve, how their lives look. And so that's why I feel like it's important to advocate for not only the people we serve, but also us. And I'll go to Alexis.
Oh.
Hi, y'all. My name is Alexis Scott-Nicky. I'm the Chapter Services Coordinator here with NASW Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. I'm so excited to be here today to talk about the importance of voting and how everybody can get more engaged. I'll pass it on to Victoria.
I am Victoria Highland. I am a licensed clinical social worker in Texas. I am a hospital social worker that does both medical social work and I do some mental health social work as well. I feel that this topic is very important and timely because most people in America are one medical crisis away from bankruptcy. And I've seen how having a medical crisis within your family changes all of your plans. And the resources in Texas just are not there for families. And that is a direct impact of policy decisions Texas has made. And I'll hand it over to you, Louise.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Louise Lynch. I am blessedly retired. I spent at least 40 years as a social worker, first in direct practice, primarily with people with disabilities. And then I was an executive on a team and practiced macro social work for most of my career, where we developed policies around services for people. I'm very much passionate about this work and do volunteer work as a volunteer deputy registrar right now. But I also see that there's so many young people who are disenchanted with the system right now. And I feel like it's my personal mission to get young people invigorated and ready to vote and take on that leadership. I think lots of times we do, as my colleagues have said, think about political social work as something that's not really within our wheelhouse. But I think you all can agree that sometimes that has to do with our sense of lack of experience in a particular area. And so it's time to put your big toe in. So here we go.
I love that. So we started this committee around November, December. And so with that came a lot of research, because even though we think that research is not going to creep into our real lives, it does. And one of the things that I found interesting in the research that we've done as a committee is that about 95% of members at one point reported that they often vote or always vote, but more or a little fewer than half believe that politically that's not really a part of their professional role. And so I thought that was interesting, and it had me thinking, because it's like, we know that it's important for ourselves to do it, but we separate policy and social work, or policy in our work. And so, like, being able to notice that there's a gap there, and then create this committee to help bridge that gap, I think was so important. So I'm going to ask, why do y'all feel like the Voter Advocacy Committee was created?
All right, Victoria, this is your baby, so you need to start.
Okay, so actually, this committee started back in 2024, believe it or not, because me and a couple of people created a toolkit, NASW Vote Social Work Votes Toolkit. And the biggest feedback we got on that toolkit was, this is great information. How do we use it? And there's not really a good avenue. Like, part of what inspired me to create the toolkit is there's not a good avenue for social workers to engage with other social workers on this topic and get involved in Texas. And I didn't want to join another organization that didn't have social work values tied to it. I wanted it to be part of what I do as a social worker. The code of ethics is really important to me, so I wanted to make sure that the values were founded in the NASW code of ethics. And so I reached out to NASW Texas to see if we could do a volunteer-based committee in order to support more advocacy and more avenues for other people to get involved who are wanting an avenue and just don't know what to do. Because that's really where I started. I wasn't even really sure all of the laws around voting and different things in Texas, because I'm not originally from here. I'm originally from North Carolina, and voting looks a lot different in North Carolina. It's a lot easier to access. And there's a lot of blockades we have found. There are obstacles to voter registration, including deputy voter registrar requirements, that don't exist in other states. And learning those is helping our committee show social workers that there is a pathway to be more involved, even if you don't see those opportunities yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think for me, I just answered the call. So the call went out for volunteers, and I just answered the call. And as we've worked more closely over this last year or so, it's been really clear about at least some of the pathways that we needed to engage in order to have our fellow social workers want to be involved with this work. And I guess, first of all, we're starting with the desire to be involved in the work, and also the importance of it. So, and as Victoria said, so much is has been education, education about what exists, but also we are trying to figure out the best way to reach out to other parts of the state. We all represent different areas of the state, and so we really are trying to engage the entire state, because we know, I'm in Austin, Texas, that things are different in Austin than they are maybe in Bastrop or other parts of the state. I know they are. And so social workers who have the skills to community organize are really the perfect ones to get engaged in this work.
I agree. I also answered the call. But that also makes me wonder, Victoria, because you said it started in 2024 with the toolkit. What made you revive the committee now?
It wasn't so much that I wanted to revive the committee now. It was that I needed to take a break and refocus and kind of let things marinate to figure out how to go forward. Um, and I think when I saw some of the changes that started happening about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I realized we really needed to be more involved because there's been shifts in focus from national level legislation to
Mm-hmm.
state and local level legislation being important. And I live in Tarrant County, and Tarrant County has a lot of local disparities that we need more involvement with, but our local voter turnout is really low. And I suspect that other areas are similar. And so I was like, we need to revive we need to turn this into a committee, and we need to make it to where social workers are um, engaging not just with national elections or around national election conversations, but around their local and state elections, because those policies are what is going to protect our neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to ask Alexis because, you are kind of twofold in this. You are working for the chapter, but you're also a student going into the social work field. What do you hope to see from this committee, and what do you hope that we're able to accomplish?
Oh, sorry if y'all can hear my daughter. She is likes attention. But as a student, I think coming into the social work field and going through the social work programs that I've been in, I have never been more involved than I am now in advocacy. And I know that amongst my cohort and amongst my friends also in the programs, they feel the same way, because this field just has a way of lighting a fire in us for advocacy. And I really hope to just see that continue and see how much further it can reach, because, of course, me and my friends have our view, but I know that it could definitely reach further. And I would like to see the reach, more than just social workers and more than just social work students, because obviously we are not the only ones impacted by all these policies.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this committee has great potential to make a really great impact and a really wide impact.
I agree. Does anybody else want to share, like, what do you see or what do you hope for when it comes to the committee and what we accomplish with this committee?
I want to echo what Alexa said about reaching further than social workers, because I think one of the things that we've talked about in this committee is also engaging clients, but and that includes the larger community. So I definitely echo that.
And I would agree as well. I kind of have this view that if you talk to a social worker, you're also connecting with at least 3 other clients, because as social workers, we're really great about, if we see something and hear something, we do pass it forward to our clients. And it is part of a lot of clients' recovery goals, right? To be more active in community, to be more engaged. Clients in various different programs may need to make some sort of program or goal-oriented plan. And clients want to be able to engage in the community and impact their community, especially older clients. If you look at the different developmental stages and things like that, older clients do want to give back and connect and share their wisdom. And one of the ways that they can do that is by being involved with community civic organizations. There's always a need for people to poll watch. There's a need for people to volunteer as election officials, things like that. And so if we are aware of those opportunities, then we can then share with our clients not only what the opportunities are, but the steps on how they can achieve those goals. It's not about how they vote, it's about just empowering them in their self-determination to get involved with the process.
Absolutely. So one of the comments that I know we heard pretty often when we were tabling at the advocacy day was that policy doesn't really affect what I do, or, I'm mad at the system right now, or I'm just a therapist, or all of these things. And I kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit. Like, what do you feel like when a social worker says that, who, like, they don't believe in civic engagement or they don't believe it affects their work? Like, what do we say to them? Like, how do we get them to realize that it actually does impact us regardless of where we are?
hmm I kind of think of it as the one of the biggest things that NASW has always taken on is wage equality, as far as social workers go. And we know we're pretty one of the lowest paid professions, women dominated. Just knowing that in and of itself should be enough motivation for people to understand how it affects us.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a therapist in private practice and you rely on any kind of payment methodology, whether or not that's Medicaid, Medicare, private insurance, or even out of people's pockets, what's going on in people's lives every day, from the food we eat to when we lay our head down at night, is policy related. It affects every aspect of our living, of our lives. How much you eat, how much you afford, whether or not you're going to be able to uh, pay for things. Right now, there's a lot of discussion, as you know, on Medicare rates again, but also on some of the things that are happening in the disability field. You know, the slip memo or whatever it's called, the DOJ letter, that's almost the same thing as writing policy, is getting ready to reverse all these gains that we've made under the Rehab Act of 504 and Olmstead in terms of saying, hey, none of that said we had to integrate anybody into the community.
Mm-hmm.
Where in the world does that thinking come from? So wherever it is, whatever's going on at this particular time, it always affects what we do and how we live. And so it's really so important. And those of us who are have the opportunity to work to make a living, that's wonderful. But if you have working with people, particularly poor people or people who are disadvantaged in some way, have a disability, um, have had bad luck, whatever it is, then those people are having much more of a struggle than we see ourselves as struggling.
That's a good point.
And to add a little bit to that, to bring it back to the students, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our student loans are changing,
Right.
and how repayment is happening is changing. That policy is going to directly impact your decisions you make out of the gate when you graduate. It's going to impact your decision about whether you go to grad school or not. Whether you like to think about it like this or not, but these policies are directly impacting the pathway into social work. They're
Yes.
also impacting our families who maybe have less means to even consider a bachelor's degree. And what is that going to mean for the trades? There are a lot of wonderful trades that do make more than what a social worker can make. But number one, if you are medically complex or have a chronic illness, those may not be avenues that you can pursue. And will the economy support everybody who needs a job to go into a trade? And so we have to understand that even at the basic level of just getting into social work, we are being impacted by policy changes. There are people who are being impacted with changes to cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and all of those things. They're having to make tough decisions about, you know, do they let this bill slide or do they take a mortgage out on their home just to pay for medication? Um, and that impacts you when you work and you get that phone call from a client who says, I can't afford my medication, that's $400. And you don't just get one of those calls because you have more than one family on a medication. So where do the funds come from to help them afford the medication that they need? And so with every policy, there are intended and unintended consequences. And if we are not at the table, then our clients' voices are not being heard.
For sure. And y'all kind of hit on this, but how do you feel like, because I want to be more specific because we do have students who are going to circle back and rewatch this. How do you feel like policy decisions show up in your everyday work? Because so I work in macro right now, but I work kind of where I work with social workers and I work with students. And so one of the things that I've noted, well, one of the things that happened in the area that I work in is they're attempting or they tried to attack Title IV funds, right? And so what that would look like was the next school year, I believe it was, those who are using Title IV to get through their social work programs wouldn't have been able to receive those funds in the same way that they had, right? Typically, the program is fully funded as long as you give X amount of time back in the child welfare system. And so that is one of the ways that policy decisions specifically related to funding showed up in my work, right? Because that now affects the students that I work with and also the social workers that I work with. And so have you guys seen anything recently about how a policy decision showed up in your work? I know, Luis, you're retired on this, but life, right?
Yeah.
It's life for you.
Not only that, but at least the first year or two, you're still kind of connected to what's happening on the ground, right? So, in the job I had, one of the things, and I think this is a community concern, has to do with services for homeless people. And recently, like at least a year ago, a lot of the funds that support people in supportive housing were cut. And supportive housing is so important. It's kind of back to what I kind of talked about earlier about this move back to institutions. Basically, it's cutting those services that are going to help people in the long run be able to live full, engaged community lives by having their own place to stay, and saying, we're only going to support you in a shelter for a very short amount of time, and then you're on your own. There's very few services left now for actually being able to move people into housing supports. That's a big impact. And there isn't anybody I know in our community that isn't like really fully immersed in this whole discussion about what are we going to do to help support people who are homeless. That's one thing. In my volunteer work, I meet a lot of students, college students, and it's been really eye-opening to me how many of them have expressed, like they don't feel like their vote makes a difference. And that is so terribly important. And so, a lot of times I say, look, let's talk about this, you know, so that we could actually have a discussion about, no matter what is going on, you can always make your voice heard. It's not just you have to vote, and you have to vote in every election. I think Victoria was talking about this, how so much happens on the local level. And you really, lots of times as a voter, you feel like your voice is more impactful on the local level, right? And it's just a way to kind of get in the habit of kind of paying attention. But we also need to think about, that education component. And that's what I like about engaging with students, because you can kind of talk about, well, what is it that's a concern, you know? Um, and also educating on the voting practice, because sometimes first time voters are really like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to expect. And you want to be able to provide that support.
For sure. And I think that is an interesting point of like making sure that you're voting on a local level, because you may feel like your voice is being heard more. Um, because, well, the reality is a lot of times that is where the least support is. It's
Mhm.
on the local levels. And I don't know if it's because the advertising dollars may not be as big as the federal level roles, but those are some of the most important positions that
Mhm.
there are.
Mhm.
For example, here in San Antonio, I think we had like, I want to say nine judges seats up in the
Wow.
last election. And there wasn't a lot of people who came out for, voting. And so these are the things that we need to be paying attention to, right? Because when you're
Mhm.
in trouble, the judges who are up there, are you sure they're the ones you want to be in front of, right?
Mhm.
Um, or like, for example, your sheriff, that's a elected position as well. So um, we have to pay attention to all of the elective roles, not just president, vice president.
Right.
And in Tarrant County, a really good example of some of the things that are going on that are impacting us at a local level is the county commissioner in Tarrant County is closing sessions for people to attend. So in most counties, you can
Wow.
attend any session you want. I think it's just limited to one time a month. Public comments can be made, and it's very restrictive on how you have to do it. You can't just show up, and they're severely limiting time. I believe somebody recently got their arm broken at a session. I it's in Tarrant County jails. We've had an unusually large number of deaths in our jails,
Mm.
and that is a direct impact of the way the city and the county is being managed, and this impacts the people who are most at risk for being incarcerated over minor um, charges. And so it's a disparity, and we're seeing it in Tarrant County. And in Tarrant County, we don't tend to vote all the way down the ballot. We stop at kind of the higher levels,
Mm.
which is why the system is the way it is in Tarrant County. And we have an opportunity to vote all the way down the ballot because there are choices all the way down the ballot this time. And it's important that people understand that your vote carries more weight locally, because a lot of times these races are only won by a couple, like maybe 1,000, maybe 100 votes. And so voting all the way down the ballot is going to ensure that your roads are repaired in a timely manner. It's going to ensure that your schools have the funding that they need. Back to the question about policy that you were asking earlier, a specific policy that I'm seeing impacting my community is that because of the vouchers for schools,
Oh,
Last year, people were using the public school system to get their children evaluated in preparation for the vouchers becoming available, which meant that children like my son, who's in public school, are having a harder time getting the assessments that they need done in school in a timely manner to get the services rendered through public school.
mm-hmm.
And so that I, as a social worker, and am educated, and I know my avenues to get him what he needs, was able to still get him what he needed. But a lot of our clients don't know, and we
Yeah.
need to be educated on what organizations we can connect people to if they run into help or run into issues and need help.
Absolutely. And so that brings me to the conversation about advocacy, right? Because some people, or a lot of people, look at advocacy as like lobbying or having to speak to the legislators. But, I think that it's way bigger than that. It
Mm-hmm.
can advocate in multiple different ways. And so, what are some ways? And I know, Louise, you mentioned a few earlier, but what are some ways that social workers can advocate every day without even realizing it? But now that we're talking about it, can be more intentional about it.
Oh, I think that's a great question. I think that goes right into the broader discussion we're having about political social work, right? Because as as a social worker, we see on the ground what's happening with folks, what's happening in their lives. And sometimes it can be to advocate could be as simple as having a discussion. Sort of like we're having this discussion now, but having a discussion with someone else to provide them with information about how they might themselves be prepared to advocate for themselves. I mean, that's where we find ourselves. That's the position we find ourselves in most often. What kind of tools can we give other people in order to speak up for themselves, or, lead them to wherever they need to go in order to get what they need? And sometimes it's just as simple as making a phone call to your city council member, your school board member. Sometimes I know social workers talk about their time and limitations on time, but these days it's so incredible. You can, lots of hearings are online. So if you have time, you can always peep in on any of those hearings or settings that they have on multiple levels, state level, local level, etc. You can also write letters, or I'm sorry, that's old school. Write an email, send text, any kind of way to communicate your point of view. And it might, you may or not, we may or may not agree with certain policy directions, but that's all the more reason to say, this is what I believe and this is why. And connecting that back to those values that we share as social workers. These policies are hurting people because of this, and that's advocacy. That's getting that information out there. But it's also, as Victoria, you were saying about, a social worker touches one person really has a multiplying impact. That's what we do. That's what we can say. You talk to other people and get them involved and engaged in different ways. It could just be a conversation. It could be a conversation on your back fence. It doesn't matter when it is, or where it is. It's just important that you have that conversation, and that you do it boldly and confidently with your values in your back pocket.
Absolutely. I agree.
I agree with that. I was thinking before you said do it boldly, I was thinking like part of social workers in Texas, I know I've talked to a number of social workers who have been hesitant to stand out or to speak up because we are afraid that we are in a minority. However, I would argue that if you believe in the code of ethics and you believe in dignity and self-worth of the person, you are likely in the majority, and that we need to have confidence. You can do something and still be afraid. You can speak up and still be uncertain. But we do have to step out of this concept of, I'm afraid I'm going to get in trouble, because we're adults. We have freedom of speech. There are laws that protect what we do, and step into the conversation. I have privilege. I carry privilege with me, and with that privilege comes a responsibility to speak up when I see something that's not right. And there are a lot of things that are not right now. There are a lot of things that I have heard. So I know a lot of us saw what happened in Minnesota earlier this year. But what they said about the videos that we saw with our own eyes are the same thing they said about George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Trayvon Martin, and a multitude of other individuals that I cannot remember their names. So if we see what's going on with our eyes and we stay silent, then are we adhering to our code of ethics? And I think now it's more imperative than ever for us to use our voice and to stand up for what we believe in. Even if that's talking to a friend, getting involved with something, another organization, writing a senator, talking to your school board. Like, I was having issues with my son and we got them resolved, but I went back and circled back with the school board and said, this is not okay for you to do to my son or any other child in the school district. You need to do better. We have the power to do those things. And those small things have an impact that we can't see. But inaction has a larger impact.
Well, you said something really important, Victoria, and that was about how, how important it is for us to use our voices. And that means within agencies or organizations that we work in as well. I mean, sometimes as an administrator, you don't necessarily want to hear all that, but it's really important when you're employed and you feel like on a policy level that something isn't working for clients, that you bring that forward to let people know what's not working about that particular policy. It doesn't mean necessarily that we're going to be able to change everything. It just means that it's just so important for us to say, this is what's not working for clients, and what can we do? As you say, you need to do better. What can we do better together to make this work?
Absolutely. I would also add to that, like, speaking up, but also doing things that will help reduce the barriers, don't add to the problem, right? So if we are able to identify an inequity within our work, within our practice, what are we doing to come up with a solution to help the people that we're working with, right? I know we also mentioned connecting clients to resources, but are you thinking outside the box? That is kind of, I think, as we go through this new era of technology, we're kind of forgetting how to critically think through situations. And so tapping back into that critical thinking piece of like, okay, so if this happens, then this could happen, but maybe this would have an adverse effect. And so, using technology as a partner and not our think piece. And so these are things that we have to do every day Alexis, did you want to add to like different ways that we advocate?
I think y'all definitely hit the nail on the head. And the only thing that I was really thinking to add was educating yourself is the first step. And going out and doing the trainings, going out and doing the research so that you can then move forward with credibility and knowledge and sharing the knowledge with everybody else. I think that's a really important step as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. And you know, Alexis, that also goes for, I mean, we've talked about voting and the importance of voting, particularly on the local level. Victoria, you brought up some really excellent examples in Tarrant County about what was going on. And you too, Dr. T, talking about what happened in San Antonio with those judges. And sometimes people don't do that research, don't go back and look at, let me find out something about who these candidates are. Now that takes work, but we all have to do it. We have to be dedicated to do that part of the work to make sure that those individuals that we're voting for are in line with our values as social workers and so that we can hold them accountable for the work as well.
Absolutely. So why do y'all feel like because we talked about how we it's in every part of our social work lives, right? Why do you feel like it feels different as a social worker when it comes to civic engagement? Why do you feel like we have to separate it? Like what do you feel like that's about?
I feel like a lot of it could be burnout and just feeling overwhelmed because I mean, what I just said was like going out and educating yourself is so important. That piece can be so overwhelming sometimes. Like Louise was just saying, like going out and doing all that work is kind of a lot sometimes, but that's where community can really come in, I think, as well. So like as much as it can feel overwhelming, just remembering that like we're a part of a community that wants to work together towards a lot of the same goals. I think that's something important to remember as well.
Yes.
I agree. And I do think it's important that we talk about what barriers do exist for social workers to participate, right? Like, it's not that we don't care. I believe that if you're a social worker, you actually do care about what's going on. Because most of the time, most of us got into this field because of something that happened or because we saw something happen to someone else. And so, like Alexis was saying, a lot of that is burnout, right? By the time we're done giving to everybody else, it's kind of hard to try to give to the world too.
Yeah.
What other barriers do you think exist? I know we did our survey, so we're kind of cheating with this, but what other barriers do y'all feel like exist, or do we know exist because of the survey that we did?
Well, I think for some that you feel like you go through grad school and you get a certain level of education. And along with the burnout component, it's like how many more CUs do you need to sit through about certain topics on identifying your bias and things like that. But there's an element of pride that comes with being a social worker, and sometimes our pride gets in our own way, where we don't want to acknowledge that maybe we have blind spots and we have biases, and that's limiting our ability to connect with topics that maybe are not within what our cultural framework is. But the reality is, the more I learn about myself and the more I learn about other people's cultures and their experiences, the more I'm able to connect with empathy to others. And so when we feel like we know enough and we stop seeking out additional education, I think that can also become a hindrance for us to experience new things and advocate for different people.
I think the other thing that we have to do is um, think about the conservation of our time. And I say that in this way. We have all kinds of ways in which we need to do self-care. But one way to kind of mitigate some of the stress that we feel as we're doing this work is to pick something, not pick everything. Pick something. So if you're going to be involved civically, pick something, pick one thing. Don't try to pick everything. If you can pick one thing and dedicate time to that, that's going to, bear fruit. We don't have to do everything all the time for everybody. Um, but I think that will definitely help. I think I was also thinking about our profession, our association. This isn't about you, Alexis. It's just that we kind of separate in our association the civic engagement, the political place from the other, and there's reasons for that, good reasons for that, and the other. And a lot of our content and our conferences is really on practice, but not necessarily integrating that practice into civic engagement, right? Um, I think we're planning to do that in our presentation, but I think, which is great, but I think that is something that if we as an association did that on a more regular basis, that could be helpful in terms of it connecting the dots for some people, especially folks that are new to practice.
That's a good point too. So Hunter said that as much as he loves learning and attending CEUs, they kind of get tedious, especially when the information is not updated. That's very, very true. And the reality is, which we didn't mention, I thought one of the ladies would mention it. The reality is, when it comes to voting and civic engagement, the data is old. Why? Because there aren't enough people doing research, right? Um,
Mhm.
and so going back to the topic of barriers, we did a survey because, we came together as a very small group. I think there were 7 when we first started, when we restarted in November. And so we were like, yeah, we're seeing this as an issue, but what is the real issue when it comes to social workers and voting? And
Mhm.
so what our survey came out to say was about 41% said the barriers were work schedule conflicts. Um, and so what that tells me is that even though you are supposed to be allotted time off to go vote, our social workers aren't actually getting it. And then 28% said lack of time,
Mhm.
which also tells me that we're not getting the time off from work to vote like we're supposed to. But it also may be because 25% said lack of information about the candidates. It also
Yes.
means that there may be accessibility issues or informational challenges when it comes to who's running, why they're running, what parties they're running from, and all of that information and why this is helpful or not helpful. And so I kind of wanted to share that because, as the team kind of mentioned, it is our responsibility to educate ourselves. Um, yes, the information is old, but it's still relevant to today, right?
Mhm.
We're seeing that based on the numbers. And so, yeah, getting active is going to be what we need as social workers for our clients, but also for ourselves. And so, transitioning that a little bit because we are tapping on the end of our conversation. Um, I do want to ask what happens if we as social workers are not at the table helping with making some of these decisions? What happens if we're not involved?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that happens is the people who have the money, like the Elon Musks who now have one who's now a trillionaire, are the ones who are going to make decisions based on what is best for their pocketbook and not best for the people.
I just think that we won't necessarily be available even to be able to give a counterpoint. I mean, if we're not at the table, we can't really discuss the issues or even bring up anything that might be centered around um, client needs if we're not there. And we have to be there. The other thing is to I recently got a T-shirt that said, you know, move without permission. And so I think sometimes we expect to be asked to the table, and sometimes we just have to invite ourselves to the table to have those discussions and find out where those discussions are being held.
Mhm. Absolutely. Alexis, you want to add?
Yes. I wanted, sorry, my daughter was just like in my ear, so gathering my thoughts for a second. But I think that something that's really important about social workers being at the table is that we do bring such a different perspective. I really value an interdisciplinary approach because every perspective brings something different. And if ours isn't there, bringing a different perspective, then it's going to negatively impact us as professionals. It's going to negatively impact the clients that we serve and the people that we work with. And in extension, it's going to have an impact on the community as a whole. So I think just making sure, like Louise was saying, if we're not invited, then we need to just invite ourselves and step in and sit down and say, this is what we think and this is what we have to add and are the value that we have to add.
I agree. And I also would add that if we're not at the table, the voices of so many other people and clients aren't at the table either. And so a lot of times we are the voices of our clients, and we have to remember that we, whether you know it or not, extend so far. Our reach as social workers alone
Mhm.
is a huge reach. And so when we're caring for them and ourselves, that means being the voice sometimes. And I would love to end our conversation with one practical takeaway. So, every social worker can strengthen democracy by, and I would say, I'll start first. I would say that every social worker can strengthen democracy by understanding that your voice matters and speaking up when necessary.
I would say that every social worker can, sorry, I lost the exact words you said, but the vibe is by registering to vote and going out and doing it, not just registering, but following through with that action.
Every social worker can strengthen democracy by,
I would say using our vote to support policies that will enact the change that we are hoping to see in the world. And by remembering that our vote carries the code of ethics with it and making sure that we are voting our code of ethics, because it's not about politics. It's not about left versus right. It's about dignity and self-worth of the person.
And I would say by engaging clients and others in the community, as well as fellow social workers, in the actual act of engagement and follow through. So if you need to bring your posse to the polls, then that's what you do.
Absolutely. So we do have a few people watching with us. If you want to add in, we would love to read your comments, or if you have any questions, we will love to answer them. I'll give a couple a minute. For y'all to join us in on that. And then we will end until next time. We will have another live, I believe, next month. And in that live, we're going to talk to a researcher about the research that he found and why. Continue this conversation, because at the end of the day, this is not a conversation that needs to happen just when it's around voting time. I know that we have an election. I get it. But we do plan to keep having these conversations even when elections are over. But we do need to start now.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Are you seeing any questions on your side, Alexis?
No.
All right. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining our conversation. Our goal wasn't to tell anyone how to vote, which is why we did not focus too heavy on that. Our goal was just to remind social workers that civic engagement is a part of ethical social work practice, and policies influence the systems that we work in and that our clients navigate every day. They determine how we access healthcare, housing, education, behavioral health services, our child welfare resources, disability supports.
Mm-hmm.
It touches almost everything that helps us live life the way that we want to live it. And so when social workers lend their voice, we strengthen not only our profession, but the communities that we serve. And we hope that you continue to follow our committee, the Voter Advocacy Committee with the NASW Texas chapter. Participate in future discussions, invite your colleagues to join the conversation, because the more of us in this conversation, the more reach that we can get through other social workers and to the communities that we serve. And with that, thank you so much to our panelists, Alexis, Victoria, Louise.
Thank you, Dr. T.
And we will see you next time.